Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. We are back here for another fun-filled, action-packed episode of Iowa conservative news and politics, insights and analysis, and John giggling. So I'm your host, Chris Hagenow. I'm joined here again with John Hendrickson and Victoria Sinclair. Victoria, we got a lot of positive feedback on election night for your appearances on the podcast, so you've earned yourself a repeat appearance.
It's an honor. Maybe we'll get another holder for the microphone so that I don't have to hang on to it the whole time.
Yes. I invited you back to the podcast, and you're already making equipment requests, so we'll get to work on that.
Oh, that's the second request for equipment today.
Yeah. John, what time did you go to bed last night on election night?
9:15.
Oh, John saw the poll counting results, and he was out.
I got discouraged.
Victoria, what time did you... Did your head hit the pillow last night?
3:30?
Yeah, good. You're a true believer. I was out by, 12:30 or 1. I had seen enough. Before we go any further, and we're going to talk about last night's election, who won, who lost, maybe a little winners and losers, and what the takeaway should be. And there was a lot of talk on this podcast in the media, in Republican conservative circles, that the red wave was on. And it appears to me that the red wave across the country didn't happen. Won some races, there's still a few out, and may still win control of the United States Senate, and did win control of the U.S. House. So it was successful at some level, but the red wave did not materialize. But the red wave happened in Iowa, and there is something that I think we should look at. And again, at early the next day, we should be contemplative about what we learned last night. But the red wave happened in Iowa. Kim Reynolds won a huge victory. Senator Grassley is reelected by a large margin, and both the House and the Senate grew their strong majorities even further. We don't really have super majorities in Iowa, but both chambers in the legislature now hold what in other states would be a super majority. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today and in future episodes here. And I need John to really put on a historian hat to draw some parallels. But the conservative movement in Iowa is strong. And we should not lose sight of that. We all care about what's happening in our country, and discouraged, John, and perhaps dismayed, wish things were different, wish that folks in other states saw things the way that we do in Iowa. But the one thing we can do is continue the work to make Iowa a shining example to the rest of the country of how it can work. We are doing that. We are ascendant, and it is happening, and it's real. And so that's my silver lining of being a little bit discouraged what happened across the country, is that we're doing everything we can in Iowa, and it is working. So that's my initial election take. But John, I know you had some thoughts that you're ready to share. You got the pad out, you got your notes, but you might be able to provide a little more depth and a little more, context to some of that. But what do you think?
Well, I think you're absolutely right on the Iowa front. I mean, Iowa, I think it's safe to say, is a red state. Iowa is fairly conservative. We saw Governor Reynolds do very well, and Chris, your predictions that you made almost came true. I mean, we were talking before the start of this program about Rob Sand is up by, was it
1,000 or 2 votes?
But
maybe.
that was very close,
right?
And
not completely over. There is a little bit out there still.
And Robbie Smith won, Brenna Bird won. So there was some really strong performances in Iowa, and there was a lot of national attention on Florida because of how well Governor DeSantis and Senator Rubio did.
Right.
But I think also what's happening in Iowa is symbolic of that conservative leadership as well. I think what
Well, I think that's right, John, and that's a point that I want to interrupt briefly. Iowa, Florida, states that weren't that long ago were purple, swing states, and strong conservative leaders that kept our state open have focused on conservative policies, were rewarded with very big wins. So I saw this morning. Governor DeSantis won Florida, which very recently was a very purple state. He won Florida by more than Gavin Newsom won California. So there's something that we need to look at in that model and think about that. Maybe because a handful of Senate candidates that maybe weren't the right choice on the outset, maybe because they didn't win, maybe it's not throw in the towel. And maybe there is something happening, and maybe the path forward isn't, a race back to the moderate establishment policies. Maybe the path forward is good, strong candidates that can articulate their positions and show a track record of success, like Governor Kim Reynolds and like Governor Ron DeSantis. So I wanted to say that as well, but you're right. I want you to keep going with that because I like where you're going.
No, I think you're absolutely right in what you said. I would agree 100% with that. I would just add that some of the national results, which I was kind of discouraged of, is first of all taught me a lesson that I should know better than to be an optimist. I'm always a pessimist.
I'm guilty of charged on election results. But, I always think everybody's going to win.
But I think what concerns me from a political culture standpoint is that going into this midterm with high inflation, with concerns about the economy, with the radical nature of the Democrat Party, I just thought Republicans would do better. And we saw how close some of these races were, and it can be debated about whether some of the candidates were good or bad. For example, Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania or Blake Masters in Arizona. I was very happy to see J.D. Vance win in Ohio. That was one I was really rooting for. But, I was very discouraged about Minnesota. I thought Scott Jensen would do a lot better than he did, and Governor Walz easily won.
Yeah.
And Minnesota also reelected one of the most radical attorney generals in the nation,
Unbelievable.
Keith Ellison. And so I think what we're seeing, and again, we're still kind of sifting through all this, but on a national scale, I think this election was reflective of how still divided the United States is and you're really seeing this urban-rural divide become more distinct. I mean, we're seeing it in Iowa. Look at the Polk County as an example. The other thing too, I think with the Republican Party, I think there's going to be a big debate over what direction to go in, because you're already seeing some signs saying that, well, it's time to move on from Trump. It's time to move on from that agenda and maybe kind of go back to a more establishment. And I think we're going to see that debate take shape as we move forward here on the Republican side about how what does it mean? I mean, what does that look like from a conservative standpoint? Is it the Make America Great Again type agenda, or is it more of a pragmatic?
We should have that debate. We should be, introspective about what do the voters expect out of the parties. But one thing I do know is that debate's not going to happen on the Democrat side right now.
No.
They are going to be emboldened that high inflation, high tax, and cultural slide is the recipe for success. I do not see that changing at all.
That's what concerns me, because I would have thought the way things are going that there would have been more support for Republicans in this. That's why I was discouraged, because what are people really paying attention?
Well, I think that's a good point. I want to get Victoria's take on it, but I think there's a question about, it's not enough to just not be what the Democrats are, is that the Republican brand, it's great in Iowa, at least in most parts of Iowa, but it's not great across the country. I mean, would you agree with that? Or
So I think, honestly, this is more of a, I hate to say, but it's almost a class issue, right? So where we saw Democrats winning nationally, I think that the common thread there largely is disposable income among people. So these people that have this high and mighty, think they're doing right by everyone kind of thing, voting blue every single time, are marginalizing these people who are voting for Republicans because they can't afford their groceries. They can't afford to fill up their car. They certainly can't afford the electric car that they're supposed to be, driving. And I think that may be the difference here. The people who are seeing an immediate threat to their bottom line, keeping their family, alive, they voted Republican.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And we'll slice and dice. That's what we do here, and figure out what do Americans want? Because when we have one of these general elections, they speak, and we need to figure out that there's certainly a realignment in American politics that's happening on that. Wealthy folks, suburbanites, coastal elites, whatever you want to call them, they still seem, it doesn't register with them what's happening in our economy.
I know you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The trends seem to hold in Iowa too, and that's the part that I guess makes a little bit of sense.
I mean, I think that's a good transition, because we need to talk about what happened in Iowa. And John talked about the central Iowa results. The places like Ankeny and Waukee, they were ready to vote Democrat in this election. Now, there's still some wins in through there, but these Polk County suburbs, don't look like the rest of Iowa.
I would argue the people in Iowa that have probably the most disposable income and, don't have an immediate threat to their family, probably, in terms of the high economic cost of the inflation that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And
I live in Urbandale. John, you're in West Des Moines.
Yep.
Things are pretty good. Our neighbors, they still have jobs. They're paying more for consumer items, but they can generally, at least most of the folks in my neighborhood, can generally absorb a rise in costs. It's not good for the economy, but they can handle it. But if you're going to work every day and you're spending these money, and you are someone who lives more paycheck to paycheck, for lack of a better term, it hurts. And that's where some of these economic problems that we find ourselves in, it matters, and then it matters electorally. And you're right. I want to keep going.
I live 3 blocks from the food bank in town
Yeah.
in Boone, and I like to take walks during the day when the weather's nice. There's always a line out the door.
Yeah.
Things
No.
are hard for the people in Boone, at least.
That's exactly right. Well, I do want to switch to the Iowa results. So we talked about the governor with a big win. Now, the crazy prediction I made, which everyone laughed at me for, was that I thought that by the time it was all said and done, Republicans would hold every federal office and every statewide office in Iowa. And it looks like, with the possible exception of the state auditor's race, which is real close, that's going to come true. So I feel pretty good about that. I'm not even sure I completely believed it when I predicted it, but but here we are, and we'll still find out on that state auditor's race between Republican Todd Halber and Democrat incumbent Rob Sand. But it's a complete remake. I think the big one that's the most interesting of the down ballot races is the Attorney General's race. Republicans haven't held that office in 40 years. And now Brenna Bird is going to be the next Attorney General.
Yeah.
And that's something that is, as much as we've moved to the right, I think we've been dismissive of what that office is and how important it is. And I think Brenna's got a big challenge ahead of her to bring that office back. And I'm saying they do many good things in the Attorney General's office. And I've worked with them, and I worked with General Miller on a lot of things when I was in the legislature. But to show what that office can be and how important it is, that will be a big part of her challenge going forward. Victoria, I want you to talk about some of the legislative races, what the breakdown we're going to be at. We talked about the supermajorities. What are the actual numbers? And who are the big surprises on both sides?
So we're at 34 in the Senate.
Out of 50 seats.
Yep. So you have our supermajority.
And the one practical, I keep interrupting everyone, and I'm sorry, the one practical impact of that number in Iowa is that you need a 2/3 majority to approve the governor's appointees. So the last bit of power that Democrats had in their minority was the ability to block a gubernatorial appointee. And that is now gone. Senate Republicans can appoint whoever they want without the Democrats stopping them. So anyway, that's important. But go ahead.
Yeah, it'll be big. I guess by and large, not a ton of surprises. At least when I was looking at this, I thought that most of these races would go red. Booslow up in Ankeny was a little close, but I think that the story there is that both of the House candidates in that district lost, both Republican House candidates, yet Michael Booslow somehow pulled it off. And I know he knocked a lot of doors, and more power to him, I guess. But that's,
I know he worked his tail off.
It's impressive.
And I'm not saying the others didn't, but he really grinded that one out.
I think he took pride in being the most knocking Senate Republican.
I had a conversation with Representative and now Senator like Booslow last night, and I went through a lot of those close suburban elections, and his comment to me was, I never really understood what it really goes into those tough races and how much it sort of was an eye-opener for him of what these battleground legislative races are really like. It's hard. But anyway, yeah, I think that was surprising.
I think the big shocker though was Senate President Jake Chapman's loss.
And
you know, I'm not sure if we could see it coming or not. Driving through that district a couple of months ago, I did see some Drone Garriott signs in yards that had traditionally been Republican or among Republican signs. And that's when I got a little bit concerned for that district.
I was thinking about that result last night. John and I live in Dallas County, and you know we had this hotly contested school board race last year, and the Democrat liberal candidates all won that by more than we thought. There's a real shift happening even in Dallas County beyond some of the other suburbs that is becoming more and more Democrat. So that one surprised me a little bit too, but tip of the cap to Senator Drone Garriott. I know that her and her team worked really hard at that for a year, and congratulations to them and their team for a big win. So the other one that was of note was that the incumbent, the other matchup of two incumbents because of redistricting, which was Kevin Kinney and Don Driscoll. And that, I think a lot of Capitol insiders really thought that Senator Kinney would win that, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, I didn't even think to talk about it, honestly, because that race was done
early.
In my head, it wasn't even a contest.
Right. I think that was surprising to a lot of people that just assumed that Kevin Kinney, kind of a more moderate Democrat profile, had somehow cracked the code and was going to be the Democrat, rural Iowa representative, and it did not come together at all. So I want to move to the House races. There's a whole lot more to talk about, but similar themes where the Polk County races were tough. They were close. We talked about those on the last podcast last week, Victoria. But, got some winners, some losers, a couple of somewhat surprises.
Yeah, so just going down the list here by number, because that's the easiest way for me. Starting in the Council Bluffs area, Brent Segrist won, which isn't too much of a surprise. It leans red. Yeah. But Sarah Abdush lost at this point in time. She's down by 9 votes. 9 votes. I don't know if they can find those votes when they recount. I'm sure there'll be a recount. 9's a lot to overcome, though. And it could go either way.
In my experience, we do a really good job of counting votes in Iowa. Once we get past Lynn County figuring it all out, it may change a vote or two, but 9 is a lot to expect out of a recount because we do tabulate votes very well in Iowa.
Yeah, so I expect that one to go to recount, but it's probably done. But anyway, going down here, getting into the metro seats now. Ken and Judge did defeat Kristen Stifler. I know she worked really, really hard, though, and he did, too, frankly. He's probably the hardest working House Democrat, and that's the...
And that is the more Democrat side of that Chapman-Trone-Garriott Senate seat, or the less... That was the harder of the two House seats for Republicans to win in the Chapman-Trone-Garriott seat.
Yeah, but the good news here, the next seat down... former Congressman, soon-to-be State Representative David Young will be headed to the Iowa House.
Yep.
So that's exciting. Big addition there. Let's see what else is interesting. So we lost both of the Ankeny seats, and we lost. I guess I wasn't really thinking that this would be a huge potential race, but Rick Olson did hold on to his seat, which was looking like it might be close, but a safe margin. But we lost the Ankeny seat, but Bill Gustav won.
Yep.
So that's huge, too. And I think that my biggest surprise of the night, frankly, was Eddie Andrews winning. I shouldn't be surprised because that man works harder than anybody I know. But the numbers in that district were terrible.
Yeah.
And the only way he won...
If memory serves, that was about a Biden +5 seat.
Yeah,
that Representative Andrews won.
But I'm sure he knocked every single door, and he probably took a selfie with everybody in that district.
He did. We said that before. If you ever want a selfie with Eddie Andrews, it's not very hard to get.
He'll be at your door soon.
That's right. Dan Gelbach won, my new state representative, and it's interesting because they were all close. Gelbach's was a little bit bigger than some of the others, but mixed bag. But Ankeny and Waukee, it just, for whatever reason, those communities are voting blue. Go ahead, John.
Going back to both Ankeny and Waukee, Dallas County, two areas of the state that are probably the fastest growing, maybe even in the nation.
No.
Do you think those are going to become, in a sense, new Polk counties where they're going to be primarily blue?
Well,
because
I think we can really get into this, and I want to really analyze all the results once they're in. But look at like, for example, the Gustav seat. There, it is a little bit more blue collar than Ankeny or Waukee, and even the fact that the Mark Weatherly Rick Olson's seat race was close. I mean, that includes the state fairgrounds on the east side of Des Moines. So there is a realignment. It used to be just the further out in the suburbs you went, the more Republican it was, and then the city core of Des Moines and the older suburbs were blue. That's changing. And I also think there's some things that we need to look at that are specific to Polk County because, for example, Lynn County, it wasn't nearly as blue as it had been in the past. And so what are those demographics that might be predictive in the future? And we can slice and dice that data going forward, but it is interesting that areas, some of the suburban Des Moines races are now more blue than some of the actual Des Moines areas of the city of Des Moines. And that is a shift.
I think it's worth pointing out, though, that Marvis Landon only lost by 130 votes.
I mean, these are
Garrett Gobble lost by 24 votes.
Yeah.
I mean, we were right there.
Well, and you talked about going back to, for example, Sarah Abdush and Landon and Gobble, and even going into a couple of the eastern Iowa seats. They really were only more than about 200 or 300 votes away from having a 67, 68 member majority in the Iowa House. It really was that close. But anyway,
so
any other?
Sharon Steckman hung on in Mason City,
and I know the Democrats spent money up there late. So
but I know her opponent worked really hard too, and that was a potential pickup. But I said it last week; it was going to be a long shot.
Yep.
That held true. Let's see what else is there was. I know at least one more shock here. So Chuck Eisenhart right now he won his re-election, but 94 vote margin.
That's right.
So pretty close. I don't think there's probably any chance of a recount there, but I mean, if they do a recount, I don't think it changes the result. Going down the list, Luana Stoltenberg won, and that was not on my radar at all.
Victoria, we talked about this after the last episode, and several others asked me what my crazy prediction was for election night, and what was the race?
Luana Stoltenberg.
Luana Stoltenberg.
And she
in Davenport, in a historically very blue area.
And right now it's looking like 29 votes
Yep.
to her
Yep.
favor, which will hopefully hold. I think that might be it for the big.
Yeah.
Oh well, actually no. There's one more. And I don't know that we can call it yet because I don't know what's going on in Des Moines County at the moment. And potentially Lee County too. The Dennis Cahoon Matt Rinker race.
Yeah.
At least the numbers on the Secretary of State's website look like Matt Rinker is probably going to win.
Yeah.
I don't know what is still out in those counties, or why the results aren't necessarily complete there, or if they're doing some sort of a recounting. But the longest serving member of the Iowa House,
Either chamber.
yeah, in either chamber may go down.
Yep. I believe Representative Cahoon was elected in 1988, if memory serves.
Yep, good guy. He's popular
Yeah,
back home.
Yep.
But I don't know that he's coming back.
Yep. I think that margin's big enough that Rinker holds on.
It really depends what's still out. I don't know
Yep.
what's going on down there, but
Well,
stay tuned, I guess, for that one.
You know, I breezed past it real quick at the outset, but I'll close with the congressional races. Looks like Senator Zach Nunn is going to Congress. He held a couple thousand vote lead over Cindy Axne. I don't believe that Congresswoman Axne has conceded that yet, but it appears that we will have Congressman-elect Zach Nunn. Ashley Hinson won a very big win, bigger than I think expected, over Liz Mathis, who was going to be, for years had been talked about as a rising star, was going to go to Congress once that she decided to run for higher office, and that did not materialize. Marinette Miller-Meeks won by a fair amount, and obviously Randy Feenster won in the 4th District in Western Iowa, but it looks like we'll hold all 4 of those congressional seats, and a part of building a majority in Congress that's not as big as many thought, but those folks here in Iowa going to Congress is part of a new Republican majority in the Congress. So,
You know who the bigger winner was, though, right?
Tell me.
Our poll.
Well, yeah, I almost want to do a whole episode on that. Okay, so I'll tease this out a little bit. I had a little fun on Twitter when the Register had their CYA poll at the end to try and get right on these races, to say, we were there all along. We were right in there. We'll go over the numbers, but we had the governor's race pegged twice in October. We polled that and saw that. And I think the ones that we were right on, where everybody else was all over the map, were in the Senate race with Chuck Grassley, that had him implausibly only up 3 over Michael Franken, and Senator Grassley, he went 12, 14 points or something. And then the AG's race with Brenna Bird. That it was 3 weeks ago that the Register tried to tell us that Brenna was down 16 points and she won by 2. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? We polled that race 4 times this year, and that was always inside the margin of error in our poll. We had her up, we had her down a couple, and I always thought that we were right and that she would get the late breaking the votes on that. So we're going to talk about that. We actually had graphics and everything prepared, and now here we are at 30 minutes in the podcast today.
Listen to it at 2 times speed.
Well, okay. Well, we'll do that, but yes. So in all seriousness, one of the big winners last night for us and our organization was the ITR Foundation Poll, John.
Yeah.
And we got, and look, our pollster, Brent Buchanan and Signal, that did a phenomenal job. They're highly rated by the 538 and these other pollsters, and they did a great job for us in Iowa. And we're going to continue with that project because on election night, we talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people had the same thing to say, is that your poll got it. And so I think more and more as we continue with that project, people are going to be looking to us for real information. And we hopefully next year, not an election year, we can do some more work on some issue things and really get a sense of where Iowans are at, which there is the big full circle, is where are Iowans at? And in our polling and on election night, they appreciate conservative governance. And so I want our listeners to be encouraged that they did their job in Iowa, and we're moving forward. We're going to keep going, and it's what the governor said in her speech last night, is that there's more to do. And we're excited for it. We're thankful for it. And so we can be discouraged about what's happening in other states, but we are doing everything we can in Iowa, and it is absolutely working. So with that, I'm going to close. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, John. We're going to do this again very soon, and we'll have probably even more to say about some of these things as they come in. So don't forget to like and subscribe and share with your friends. We appreciate you listening, and we will see you next time on ITR Live.